Breaking news for you now. A jury has found singer R. Kelly guilty of racketeering in federal court. R. Kelly was facing charges for being the ringleader of a decades-long scheme to recruit women and underage girls for sex. Let's bring in ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Katursky, along with Terry Austin, host and legal analyst with the Law and Crime Network, for more. Terry, I want to start with you. We were talking all morning about these charges and what was going to happen to R. Kelly. We were both discussing how surprised we were also that he had been acquitted 13 years ago. What do you think made this time so different?
I think this time it was different because the federal prosecutors here brought that RICO charge. They were able to reach back over years and bring in multiple victims who testified, and their testimony was extremely clear and it was consistent. R. Kelly was controlling, he was abusive, and he trapped these women. He did not let them, quote unquote, escape. And I think the jury heard that. They also saw video evidence, so they saw what was going on. And I think that was the major difference between this federal court case against him and the case back in 2008 when he was not found guilty. And frankly, there wasn't a witness in that case who could get on the stand and talk about what R. Kelly did.
And also his personal assistant, right, of 16 years, came forward with some pretty explicit details. I mean, when you're working side by side with someone as a personal assistant for almost 2 decades, you know a lot.
That's right. She saw all of the women coming in and coming out. She actually was their escort at certain times. She took them shopping. She sort of took care of them, but she knew what was going on. She heard about the abuse that was going on. She saw what was going on behind those closed doors in terms of his assaults against those women. And so I think the jury looked at her and they believed her because it wasn't secondhand, it was firsthand. She was very close to everything that occurred. And so I think this is one of the reasons we got the verdict. And it's relatively quickly. They only started at the end of the week, and now it's Monday, so not that many hours they've been deliberating. In fact, I think it's probably 6 to 9 hours. So I think, relatively speaking, it's a very fast verdict. And when you get a verdict back that quickly, it means that the jury was very, very careful, but it also means that they were pretty consistent in the way they were thinking. There were probably not that many individuals who were disagreeing with whatever the consensus was. If you recall, they did have 1 or 2 questions about Sonia, who was one of the witnesses, and they wanted to know whether or not they could see the map of the studio and whether or not she had the ability to escape. But other than that, it doesn't sound like they had too many questions about the guilt or innocence of R. Kelly.
And our investigative reporter, Aaron Katursky, calling in as this verdict has been read. Aaron, apparently R. Kelly sat motionless in the courtroom. I'm seeing some of the detailed color from inside the courtroom coming out right now, his facial expression hidden by his mask. What can you tell us about how things went down when the verdict was read, and also finding out that he was found guilty on all 9 counts of racketeering and sex trafficking charges today?
This was a relatively quick verdict. The jury did not even deliberate on a full day. This was the second day of deliberations after they got the case in the middle of the day on Friday. They took the weekend to think it over, but it doesn't appear they had a lot of doubt, Kira. Instead, we have a jury coming back with a verdict that suggests that R. Kelly was the ringleader of a criminal enterprise, as prosecutors put it, that not only bolstered his music and his image, but that was also there for his sexual gratification and recruited women and girls, sometimes threatened them, held them against their will, forced them into not only different sex acts, but into certain behaviors that were, that were dictated by Kelly. And this went on over a number of decades, almost 3 decades worth of criminal conduct. And Kira, the specific allegations here involve 6 women, including the late singer Aaliyah, but we know that there are others, and he will stand trial in Chicago next on additional federal charges.
And Terry Austin, if I can come to you on a question. This charge is a landmark charge in the music industry. There's been a lot of sex with underage girls in the music business. There's been exploitation of underage girls. It was kind of almost boasted about at one point in songs that groups sang. Is this a moment of reckoning for that business? And also, someone noted that this is really the first major Me Too case that involved the accusations of black women being heard. How do you read this?
You know, I think that's exactly right. This is a landmark decision for so many very reasons. First of all, it was kind of unique that we have a RICO charge for sexual activity. Generally speaking, you have this type of charge for a mob crime or something that has an enterprise that really is an incorporated company that is doing things that are illegal. Here, what the prosecution did is they said that he set up this enterprise for his brand, obviously, and for his music, but also to conduct this sexual activity that was illegal. And so this case is definitely landmark for that reason. The other reason, and Terry, you mentioned it, this is the first time that we've seen in the media like this, a case where we have women, young girls, and young black girls who are being used for the sexual pleasure of someone who is in the industry, someone who is famous, and yet it was a prosecution and it was a guilty verdict. And I think the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement, definitely contributed to that. And no longer will jurors be accepting the fact that just because you have a public image and a big name and you are a Grammy Award winner, you will no longer be able to take advantage of people, particularly young girls underage, the way R. Kelly did for decades.
So, Aaron, what's next? What does this verdict mean for R. Kelly?
Well, it means he faces decades in prison, but it's not the end for him. He's got another federal trial in Chicago. He's got state charges in Illinois to contend with after he was already acquitted of certain charges back in Illinois some decades ago. You know, we just heard from his defense attorney who said the jury has cherry-picked some inconsistencies in testimony, but I'm not sure there were that many inconsistencies, to be honest, Kira. The testimony was fairly clear and straightforward, and prosecutors built a case that was basically the documentary Surviving R. Kelly. The federal agents from Homeland Security Investigations saw the documentary. They said, wow, and they built a case based entirely on that and ended up with a conviction here. It wasn't terribly complicated once federal agents actually bothered to bring the case, and so now R. Kelly is unlikely, in all honesty, to see the light of day again as a free man.
And Terry, just to follow. Sorry, I'm sorry, Kira.
No, Terry, go ahead. We're in rolling coverage. Go.
All right, good. So. Terry, just to follow up on what Aaron was talking about, a lot of people might have heard about racketeering. It is a very serious crime. He's looking at hard time, isn't he?
He absolutely is. This is up to 20 years for the RICO, and for the Mann Act, another 10 years. And he's 56. So it does mean essentially that this will be, quote unquote, a life sentence, because it looks like if, in fact, he's sentenced to the maximum number of years, he will be in prison for a number of decades. And you're absolutely right. This is a very serious charge, and it could be a precedent for others to follow. Now that it has been accomplished in federal court, we could very well see when we have this sort of ring of enterprise where you are using your managers, your bodyguards, your security people to actually bring in these individuals, take them across state lines. You may very well be seeing other high-powered people who could be brought in with this type of angle under the RICO Act. Many people thought that it was unusual, that it would not succeed, but I think the prosecution, I agree, I think the prosecution did an excellent job of tying it all together, sticking to the facts, making sure they wove that story so the jury could understand why this was an important case where they had to find him guilty of RICO and violation of the Mann Act.
Terry, Aaron, stay with us. We want to get straight to the press conference. Gloria Allred just stepped up to the mics in New York City there. As you know, she was representing these victims. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
I'm attorney Gloria Allred. Today, R. Kelly has been convicted of very serious federal crimes. Mr. Kelly, who once described himself as a, quote, genius, end quote, to one of my clients who testified, is nothing but a convicted felon. I attended this trial because I represent 3 of the 6 victims for whom charges were filed in this case and who testified at this trial. In addition, I represent 2 other key witnesses who testified, and another victim, Jane Doe number 9, who was prepared to testify but was not called to testify. I have been practicing law for 47 years. During this time, I have pursued many sexual predators who have committed crimes against women and children. Of all the predators that I have pursued, however, Mr. Kelly is the worst for many reasons. First, he used the power of his celebrity to recruit vulnerable underage girls for the purpose of sexually abusing them. These were not May-October relationships, which is what his defense attorney wanted the jury to believe. These were crimes against children and some adults. Second, he used the power of his business enterprise and many of his inner circle employees to assist him and enable him in his plan and his scheme to lure his victims to him, isolate them, intimidate them, control them, indoctrinate them, punish them, shame them, and humiliate them. All of which made Mr. Kelly more powerful and more dangerous than many other sexual predators who operate without a network of financial and businesses to support and enable them. Third, the government proved that Mr. Kelly had genital herpes, that he knew that he had it, but failed to disclose it to his underage victims and adults, and that he failed to use condoms to protect them and lower the risk of contracting it. As a result, many of his victims contracted this sexually transmitted infectious disease from him and will be forced to suffer from it for the rest of their lives. Fourth, in many cases, Kelly, after grooming, isolating, and intimidating his child victims, recorded them being sexually abused and humiliated by him. He directed these videos and produced them, not only for his own sexual gratification, but in some instances for the purpose of using these videos to silence and threaten his victims with public exposure of these tapes if they ever revealed what he had done to them. These tapes were not sex tapes. They were child pornography, which is a crime. In their closing argument, the defense had the nerve to bring up the name of Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. What they failed to mention is that Martin Luther King, Jr. said that, quote, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character," end quote. That is what the jury did today. Based on the evidence, the jury must have concluded that the defendant, R. Kelly, was no Martin Luther King, Jr. Instead, R. Kelly is a sexual predator who is guilty of very serious federal crimes. The defense should be ashamed of even mentioning the name of Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. in any discussion of R. Kelly, a dangerous sexual predator who has harmed so many women and underage girls. The defense also argued that Mr. Kelly treated his victims, quote, like gold, end quote, targeting them, recruiting them, isolating them from their family and friends, forcing them to follow his abusive rules in order to control them, punishing them if they did not follow his rules to the letter, hitting them, threatening them, sexually assaulting them, giving many of them genital herpes, and victimizing them by recording many of them on child pornography tapes, is not treating them like gold. R. Kelly thought that he could get away with all of this, but he didn't. Because despite the fact that he thought he could control all of his victims, he was wrong. Many of his victims had the courage to speak up and tell their truth, under oath, in a court of law. I am very proud of my clients who agreed to testify in this case. I thank them for trusting me, law enforcement, and the jury to find the truth. My clients who testified fought through their fear and relived their painful experiences with R. Kelly and his enablers. R. Kelly's victims handled themselves with dignity and survived intense cross-examination by the defense. Because of their courage and the outstanding work of federal agents and prosecutors in this case, justice has been done. Let this be a message to other celebrities who also use their fame to prey on their fans and others who are unfortunate enough to come into contact with them. You're also likely to face serious consequences for your criminal conduct. The issue is not if the law will catch up to you. The only question is when. I also have a very short statement from one of my clients, and that's Sonia. I know that she is happy with the verdict that Mr. Kelly has been convicted, and thankful that the jury listened to her and to the rest of the witnesses. She says, I've been hiding from Robert Kelly in fear due to threats made against me, and I'm ready to start living my life free from fear and to start the healing process. I want to thank the jury for considering the evidence and truly listening to my testimony. I want to thank the U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal prosecutors in this case. Thank you for shining a light and helping me to get out from under that rock that I stayed under for far too long. Also, thank you to the federal agents who have listened to my story and for all that you have done to protect myself and others over the last 2 years. If you've been in a similar situation, I urge you to come forward as well. It will be like a weight lifted off of your shoulders. No one should have to live like that.
Gloria, do you feel, or do the women you represent feel like justice has been served today? Are they angry that it's taken many decades of allegations?
Well, I mean, since the verdict was not just announced, I've not had a chance to consult with all of them. But I know that a number of them feel that if he's been convicted of any crimes, whether or not it was crimes for which he was charged in reference to them, that they're happy that he's convicted.
Are they upset it's taken so long to get to this point?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question.
Sorry, are they upset that it's taken this long for this to happen?
Are they upset that it's taken this long for things to happen? Well, they understand that justice moves at a glacial pace. It's not like it is on television, which I've said many times. Everything doesn't happen within 1 hour.
In regards to Sonia, the jury didn't.
And if you're just tuning in, just to bring you up to date, R. Kelly, once atop the world of the R&B charts, found guilty of all 9 counts of the racketeering and sex trafficking charges against him. Gloria Allred representing 3 of the 6 victims who actually spoke in court, hearing just gut-wrenching details of how this man sexually abused young children for years, even using the name of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Just sick behavior. Terry Austin, just looking back at the fact that R. Kelly was acquitted on child pornography charges in 2008, and it just allowed his career to keep flourishing, keep abusing children. Now, finally, he has been found guilty on these charges. But think of all the kids that were sexually assaulted during that time period. And then Aaron Katursky pointing out that really it was this documentary series, Surviving R. Kelly, that woke up law enforcement in many ways to really pursue this case. What does that tell us about about the power of someone like R. Kelly and his ability to just evade any type of persecution, or arrests, and the ability to keep abusing kids for so many years because of who he was and the power that he had?
You know, Kira, on the one hand, he is a powerful figure. A huge industry of music was backing him up, and it was all about the finances. He brought in money for the record companies, and he brought in money, obviously, for his brand. And he was allowed to continue this behavior, even though there were rumors way back when about the fact that he was spending a lot of time with young girls. Obviously, Aaliyah was the youngest, and ultimately he ended up marrying her before she was tragically killed. But there were so many other young girls, and he paraded them around. He did not hide the fact that he wanted to be with them, that he gave his telephone number to so many of them, and they lived with him. But it was because of our culture of allowing these powerful, generally speaking, male figures to dominate the industry and to dominate young girls, and in a couple of instances, young boys as well. But now I think with the help of the media, with the help of these movements like Me Too, we are actually playing a role. And when I say me, I say we, I mean the media is playing a role here as far as bringing to light what is going on and actually assisting the prosecution in where to look, how to gather this evidence, who to talk to. Many of the people that we heard on the stand, and we heard 45 witnesses over the course of 4 weeks or so, and most of them said the same thing, and many of them were on the show, the video of Surviving R. Kelly, that series. And so I think we're going to see in the future that the media is going to assist, and I think we're going to see in the future that the public is going to assist when it comes to making sure we get these people who are acting too powerful.
And we're going to get right to the acting U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of New York, who's giving a press conference right now. We'll come back to you, Terry.
And horrific details of their lives with him. No one deserves what they experienced at his hands or the threats and harassment they faced in telling the truth about what happened to them. We hope that today's verdict brings some measure of comfort and closure to the victims. This conviction is the latest in a long line of prosecutions by this office to protect women and vulnerable minors from sexual predators. Today's result was made possible by the outstanding work, dedication, and skill of the prosecution team. AUSA's Elizabeth Geddes, Nadia Shahada, and Maria Cruz Melendez. And senior investigator Keith Kolovich and paralegal specialists Kira Wenthen and Alyssa Fagel. Their grace under pressure was truly extraordinary. I want to commend and thank the Special Agents Ryan Chabot and Sylvette Reynoso of the Department of Homeland Security Investigations, under the supervision of Supervisory Special Agent Elvin Hernandez, for their outstanding work on the case, along with detectives from the New York City Police Department. Together, this superb team spent countless hours over years to sort through records and documents and interviewing over hundreds of witnesses to painstakingly marshal the facts and build a strong case. I also want to thank the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Northern District of Illinois, and Cook County State's Attorney's Office for its assistance. Last but not least, I want to thank the men and women of the jury for their time and attention throughout the trial and for their careful assessment of the overwhelming evidence in this case. In rendering its verdict today, the jury delivered a powerful message to men like R. Kelly. No matter how long it takes, the long arm of the law will catch up with you. I will now turn over the microphone to HSI Special Agent in Charge, Peter Fitzhugh. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter
there's
Fitzhugh, and I'm the Special Agent in Charge for Homeland Security Investigations here in New York.
All right, so there you heard it. Let's go back to Terry Austin. We were just hearing from the acting U.S. attorney who brought this case and successfully convicted singer R. Kelly on 9 counts of racketeering and sex crimes, sex trafficking essentially, looking at very serious punishment. I want to ask you, Terry, about what we've heard both from the acting U.S. attorney there and from Gloria Allred, the lawyer for the victim of, for the 3 of the victims in this case. Your heart just goes out to them. I've covered some child sexual abuse trials, and the verdict, when it comes in, you can almost sense it in them. Somebody listened. Their voice mattered. Somebody believed what they had to say. And I wonder what you think about the message this sends to all the victims out there whose cases have not been taken up because lack of resources, lack of notoriety, or who are still living with that pain and trauma without hope, really, of being vindicated by it. Do you think this is a moment for them?
I do, Terry. I think this is a big moment for them, even those individuals who aren't going to be able to bring charges against whomever their abusers might be. What it says is our sisters, our daughters, our mothers are no longer, and our brothers as well, going to be allowed to be abused like this for any reason, no matter how powerful the individual is or how much money that individual is making for any particular industry. So the message, I think, is very clear, and I think others who have been abused will feel some vindication. Obviously, the 11 victims who were involved with this case will feel vindicated, but I think others who weren't involved with this case, who might have met R. Kelly in the past and maybe been abused by him, or who may have been abused by other individuals, will definitely feel as though people are listening to him and people are caring about how they feel.
You know, Terry, you mentioned when we were talking about just how many years he was able to get by with abusing these kids, countless victims. And you mentioned it was the power of who he was as a musician and his brand in the industry. So what happens to his music now?
Well, he's going to have a lot of difficulty supporting himself, much less, you know, he's trying to get out of paying child support to his second wife, and he is claiming that he isn't making any money. And that is the case because we know for a fact that there was a movement to shut down his music, to boycott his music, to mute R. Kelly. And he is going to be in a very difficult position now to pay any money to anyone he may be owing money to. And his brand obviously is extremely tarnished. I think I said he was 56, he's 54. If he spends several decades in prison, by the time he comes out, he won't be in any position, obviously, to resume his career. And if he's near bankruptcy now, I think we're going to see that he's going to be destitute. And he still has these other trials to defend himself, both in Illinois and Minnesota. He's facing some charges there as well. Illinois, he has both a federal court case and a state court case, and he's facing charges in Minnesota. So he's going to have to get together a defense team. He had a great defense team here, although I think pointing to the victims and blaming them was not the right tactic, but he is going to have to get a defense team for himself to prepare for these other charges against him.
Again, R. Kelly found guilty of all 9 counts of the racketeering and sex trafficking charges against him. He sat in that courtroom motionless as those charges were read. Terry Austin, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.